Many thanks, Richard, and many thanks to IFPRI for its hospitality and the opportunity to give this talk. What I'm going to present to you is a brief analysis of the publication outputs of the journal. This is not seen from the perspective of an editor. It's seen from the perspective of a scientist. And I've been asking those questions. Which topics have been the most addressed by the journal? Are all aspects of the journal, are all the aspects of food security addressed? Are there heterogeneity in this coverage? How interdisciplinary is really the journal? And finally, what is the shape of the food security problem through the particular lens of a journal, which is called food security? And so I'll go quickly through the methods. I've used a sample of articles during the past 10 years. So I'm covering the entire publication record of the journal for the past 10 years. That's 500 plus articles which have been analyzed individually, each of them in terms of title, abstract, keywords. I've categorized the information. I've processed it the best way I could, and we can discuss that later. And then I came up with a number of variables to describe each and every of the articles that had been published. For instance, which of the food security component has been addressed, which target or scale of the food security problem is addressed, global, country, region, household, individuals in terms of children or women, which type of article is it, which is the study region covered by the particular article, which system has been considered. Are these physical systems such as the agro-system, forest, freshwater, marine, or city systems, or are we talking of the policy environment system, the food system, the market, global or local? And then questions about the variable about the very many variables dealing with the food security factor. And so here we have a huge number of additional variables which go from belief and rituals to water, which are all elements which contribute to some of the components of food security. And so if I may take you through the distribution frequencies I got, for instance, this one is to show that there is a large number of articles dealing with case studies, empirical work, experimental work, a fairly large number of reviews, and the other categories are less represented. Here we have a bar chart about which type of food security component has been most addressed by the journal. It goes from production here, which is a very large component, stability, availability and stocks. We have economic access, utility and safety. Multiple components have been addressed in quite a few journals. We see also that the physical access to food is much less addressed than the other components. In terms of scales, what are the targets of those articles? In terms of the scale which is considered in those articles, we see that there is a very large number of articles dealing with the household. The household scale is one of the favorite topics of the articles of the journal, but we see country, region, and global studies quite frequently. We see much less of articles in terms of individuals, women, children, or other individuals. In terms of systems considered, we see, of course, a very, very large number of articles dealing with agro-systems in general, and we see much less articles dealing with other production systems such as agroforestry and forests, freshwater, marine, gardens, cities. But there is a reasonably nice input, reasonably nice representation of non-physical systems such as the food systems or the market system and so on. We see tremendous variability among the factors, and I'm not going to enter all the details of this diagram, but simply to say that some factors of food security have been much less represented than others. One of them which strikes me is biodiversity, for instance. Very few articles address biodiversity as a key factor determining food security. We see very few articles dealing with migration and with political unrest or conflicts. And we have a quite large number of publications, articles, submissions coming from Sub-Saharan Africa. We have a fairly large number of publications coming from South Asia, whereas the other countries, the other regions of the world are less represented. And so, if I may, very briefly, I would like to guide you through what is called a multiple correspondence analysis. That's a way to represent in a two-dimensional plane a contingency table. It's a way to represent associations on a two-dimensional space. And here I'm using as a contingency table the cross between the components of food security, so you remember there are 7 of those, and the scales of food security, the scales at which food security is studied. So it can be the individual, the household, the country region, or the global scale. And when we do this, when we map those associations, we see that there is a statistical association among these publications in food security between the individual person and the notion of food safety, nutritional value, utility. So there is an association between these two types of categories, and there is also an association between household and economic access here. We also see that country region tends to be more associated with the production issues and the stock aspects. And the global scale tends to be associated with many of the food security components. So using this matrix, using this diagram, using this map, if you wish, we are able then to project additional variables to see how they relate to this first contingency table. And this is what it gives in terms of systems. So the systems considered, if you recall, are the food system, are the economic system, the policy environment, the agro-systems, and the trade and global. And we have the cities. For instance, we see that cities as system are mostly associated with households. We see that a country region is mostly associated with trade at the global scale. We also see that the food system is associated with both the individual and person and the global scale. What this means is something to explore, is something to interpret, is to analyze. But these are interesting relationships in the publication record of the journal. And we can also use the same map to represent the distribution of countries or regions in the world which have been studied. We see, for instance, that countries such as in regions of the world such as Central Asia, East Europe, and East Asia are more associated with stocks and country region aspects. And we see that some of the key regions where food security is a major issue is are at the center of the graph, meaning to say that they are the core of the aspects that are covered by food security articles. So I would like to not take too much of my time. I would like to just emphasize a few things. At food security, we are trying to look at those elements: production systems, natural resources, the social economic systems, and their interplay. We tend to see, and this is my personal vision, which will be discussed with my colleagues in the coming hours and the coming day, I tend to see those things as overlapping and together contributing to food security or the lack of food security. But there are elements which, to my mind, are critical for us as a journal to be aware of. One of them is the collapsing biodiversity, which cannot possibly not have consequences for global food security. I'm also thinking in terms of climate change, which is not an aspect which traditionally has not been covered by food security as a journal, even though there's been a lot of articles and lots of publications on the topic. And lastly, what surprises me and what strikes me, and it comes back to recent publications, recent reviews in Science and Nature, what strikes me is that in a journal like Food Security, there's been actually very few papers dealing with the global population, with the rise of the global population and with the population threat, the threat associated with the global population rise. So, very briefly, and this is underway, this is work underway, and this is just my personal vision, and I'm really prepared to discuss all these things with the colleagues of the editorial board. I think that what we see in the publication record of the journal is that it's a successful journal in being interdisciplinary. There are challenges to be multidisciplinary, by the way. It's not easy. It is difficult to belong to multiple disciplines at the same time. And some cautious directions, from my perspective, would be perhaps to look more in the physical access. In terms of scales, maybe look more into the individuals, especially women, children, the elderly. Look at some factors which are listed here, maybe animal health, beliefs and rituals, biodiversity, conflicts and migrations. And then look at systems other than the agro-systems, maybe more in the future, such as forests and agroforests, freshwater, marine systems, cities and gardens, with the household gardens, which you know are an important part of food safety, food security, and maybe peace in the world. With that, I would like to thank you again very much for your presence here.